Oh, okay.
Yeah, see, that's a nice way to do it. Just edit it in post
There you
and
go.
then take all of this stuff out. Okay, and we'll go on in three, two, one. Everybody loves sleepers in fantasy football, and at the tight end position, you'll be especially looking for sleepers, including Adam Trautman. We'll talk about him and more on the Audible Live. Chris Allen, Cecil Lammey, and let's talk about Trautman because is it his skill set or, Chris, is it just the opportunity? Because in New Orleans, it is Michael Thomas and littering, and it seems like that lack of talent at all skill positions, pass catchers, not the running backs, obviously, Alvin Kamara, but is Trautman set up because of that opportunity and Michael Thomas and a bunch of question marks behind him?
I think it's a combination of both of those things, to be quite honest, Cecil, because I remember back to, gosh, I'm trying to remember the week, but it was last season. DFS, everybody was ready to jam Adam Trautman into their lineups because they knew Jared Cook was going to be out that particular week. And we were left holding the bag because he didn't record not a single catch like in that particular game. So a lot of folks I know are burned on Adam Trautman, but I got to at least show some love like for my guy. Like I'm from Dayton, Ohio. Adam Trautman graduated from Dayton. And so if he's the best thing to come out of Dayton, like in some time, at least regarding NFL prospects, at least look at the fact that one, he is one of the, like from an athletic profile standpoint, he does look like the type of guy that we would want to target, right? It's not like he's going to be a burner or anything like that, but still, he is one of those like big bodied, I mean, has some speed to him given his size, and in an offense that we know is going to be piloted by at least the wild card in Jameis Winston, or it could be Taysom Hill. But if we're thinking that we would want some sort of control, some sort of normalcy, I mean, to be able to give that to Jameis Winston, wouldn't you want a guy like Adam Trautman to be involved in your offense? I mean, I know some of the statistics involved with Troutman's efficiency last season doesn't look great. I mean,
Right.
it wasn't. I mean, he wasn't utilized all that often in that offense. But if you look at how Jared Cook was being used, I mean, primarily almost like 64% of his routes, like coming from the slot, wasn't asked to do a lot in line. I mean, the Saints just re-signed Ryan Ramczyk like to that offensive line, so it looks like Trautman might have the opportunity to be split out wide versus doing the dual purpose work of the tight end, where he's asked to play like in line, also being able to split out as a wide receiver. If he gets that opportunity, if he's able to work more as a receiver, now we can start to excel just for the points that you mentioned, Cecil. I mean, it has been Michael Thomas, but afterwards, I mean, we've been waiting for Traquan Smith. I mean, who was it before? It was like Marquez Callaway. I mean, we know that, I mean,
He's going to do E when Emmanuel Sanders was there, right?
Exactly. So it's like, we know that the opportunity should be there, a part of that offense, because I mean, it's Alvin Kamara, it's Michael Thomas, but where else are those targets supposed to go? And for my money, I mean, Adam Trautman at least profiles as the guy that should be able to capitalize that here in year two for me.
Chris Allen, Cecil Lammey, the Audible Live here on our YouTube channel. Make sure to do all those YouTube things like, comment, share, and subscribe here. And, of course, check out footballguys.com. Save time, win more. It's footballguys.com. Sign up for our free daily newsletter. Just go to footballguys.com, look for that orange box that says join now, and set it up. Free daily newsletter. You've got a life, we don't. Let us handle the news, and you go out and enjoy yourself this holiday weekend. The Trautman thing is interesting to me for a couple of reasons, Chris. One, Jameis Winston, dating back to Florida State. What did he throw, like 49% of his passes to his tight ends at Florida State?
Yeah.
He was the number one quarterback in FBS to utilize the tight end position. It's always been something wherever Jameis has gone, you go, okay, wait a second. Let's see if he's going to go to those tight ends, obviously mostly in Tampa there. But now with the Saints, expecting him to win the job, Taysom Hill will still be Taysom Hill. He'll be gadget play, gadget guy. But that factor, along with Troutman's strong route running ability and high football intelligence, makes me go, okay, throw out the analytics from last year. You know, young tight ends take some time to get going. You know, people that were big on TJ Hawkinson as a rookie were disappointed. Then they weren't disappointed with TJ Hawkinson as he continued to move on. With Trautman, I see the same thing. And somewhere our man Dave Kluge is, you know, shaking his fist at the heaven, talking about Kyle Pitts. That's for a different time. This is deep sleepers. Obviously, everyone's jumping on Kyle. Kyle Pitts has to hit his ceiling and maybe even then some for where people are taking him right now. But Trautman, much different at a much better value.
Right. And if we're thinking about like where he can get that value from, I mean, of course, we would expect him to have at least a decent target share between the 20s where he's maybe picking up maybe 3 or 4 targets like here and there, depending on the drive, so on and so forth. But really for tight ends, it's really about those money touches. It's those high value touches. It's those touches like as they're trying to take those shots on goal. And again, I'm going back to who are the main guys that are going to be a part of that red zone package, like for the Saints, like moving forward? Michael Thomas, Alvin Kamara, absolutely. But are we really thinking that once they get in close, it's going to be Traquan Smith, where he hasn't been able to separate for however many years we've been waiting for him? I mean, if for my money, again, it's going to be those big body types that we know for a guy like Jameis Winston, who has those interceptions just like bubbling up underneath. I mean, to me, it points back to Trautman being that guy who we know can be savvy as a route runner. We know can be useful in the red zone, where we know the Saints are going to need to continue to score points in order to keep up with the rest of the NFC South. So to me, it just all kind of aligns for Adam Trautman to be that guy for Jameis, like here in year 2. I mean, if not, I mean, who else are we really going to be depending on out of the Saints in order to score? I mean, where we're drafting a lot of the Saints players right now, we're drafting them like they're still going to be contending to move out of their own division, despite the fact that, at least with the loss of Drew Brees, I mean, there are some serious concerns about that offense. So at least as of right now, I mean, without too much, competition for targets in that offense, I mean, Adam Trautman has at least one of the best pass from the tight end position to wind up really outkicking his ADP this year.
Cecil Lammey, Chris Allen here on the Audible Live, and we continue on a deep sleeper article that we had at footballguys.com. You can check it out. 10 deep sleepers at tight end. I tweeted about it the other day. The rare Cecil Lammey tweet. So, Blake Jarwin, are you a Blake Jarwin truther? We know there in Dallas, the way that Dalton Schultz was utilized after Jarwin went down, it seemed like he was everybody's favorite sleeper. There's a hive mind in the fantasy community you're obviously very well aware of, Chris, and it seems like every year people will jump on this and Twitter will be all abuzz about it. And if I'm hearing about it on Twitter, because I barely spend any time on that app for multiple reasons, if I'm hearing about it, okay, and not that I already didn't know who Blake Jarwin was, but like that hype was fizzled out quickly with his knee injury. Then we saw Dalton Schultz. Now the hype seems to be back if you were a truther to begin with, but then also ignoring what Schultz did, and it's not like they're just going to go away from him. But Dak's back, and people are excited about Jarwin in this offense.
As they should be, though. I mean, as you mentioned, because if Dak is back and he's the one that's going to be piloting this offense here in 2021, I mean, we're already kind of looking back at just the first 5-6 games of last year and trying to see where the Cowboys offense can be in 2021. I mean, Dak, top quarterback, one of the top quarterbacks in the league, averaging well over 400, just over 420 yards passing per game. And we're now seeing, the camp videos. I don't know, but I try not to pay attention to those as well, because at least in my mind, because we wind up double counting what those receivers can wind up doing. Like, we're hearing stuff about Michael Gallup being put into the slot, CeeDee Lamb moving outside and mossing players in practice. I mean, all those things makes us more and more excited about the Dallas Cowboys offense, and part of that involves Blake Jarwin, because as you mentioned, Dalton Schultz getting involved. People want to go back to 2019, where Blake Jarwin was at least a part of the offense, running about 35% of his snaps out of the slot. And we know that can still wind up being a productive area of the field, for somebody like Blake Jarwin. A guy that doesn't have a ton of speed, doesn't have a ton of, when we compare him to Adam Trautman, don't really see the same route running savviness from Blake Jarwin, but it's just the offense that he's attached to. And that's what we care about. If I can get a cheap piece, from an offense that I know is at least going to have to move the ball down the field, to keep up with the other team, because they really haven't done anything on defense to really save themselves for where they're at in 2020, I'll take that cheap piece. So while I understand, folks do want to draft Blake Jarwin, and unfortunately I am one of those people, I can totally understand the fact that you do need to take into account that, one, he's coming off of injury. That is one of the things that we need to account for, but also Dalton Schultz was, a significant part of that offense, after Blake Jarwin went down. So while I understand the hype, It's just one of those things where you need to kind of, I guess, account for where some of those players are going in your drafts, but
Right.
at least be cognizant of the fact that we could be wrong. It could be them just splitting the job, and we wind up catching some of that value that goes towards Dalton Schultz instead. But I can't see that. I can't understand like the hype behind Blake Jarwin for sure.
Yeah, it seems like Jarwin GMs are just so excited they can't stop like talking about him. It's like we get it. It's almost like in our next situation with Jared Cook, again going through 10 deep sleepers tight ends. Jared Cook and the whole I think as I run the newswire for footballguys.com. So when you sign up to the newsletter, you're seeing comments from me or Sigmund or Joe Bryant. And I don't know, every other day, every other week, I get hey, Mike Williams is going to play the X, everybody. And that's a big position. I know we're talking tight end. So I'm like, okay, yeah. You got the hammer. You're hitting everybody on the head, Chargers beat writers. Mike Williams is going to play the X. Well, what about Jared Cook? Because I think of a fantastic offensive line with the Chargers. I mean, getting Rashawn Slater, that's the chef's kiss right there. It's absolutely fantastic for that young quarterback who set the league on fire coming in that Kansas City game that he didn't even know he was going to play. And ever since then, didn't look back. So Cook, security blanket for Justin Herbert. You mentioned it. Sometimes you just want a piece, right? Hey, this high-powered offense, we're going to get to Noah Gray a little bit later. Because I'm talking sleepers. Okay, and I'm going to be a sleeper snob coming up a little bit later. But let's talk about the old man, Jared Cook. And by the way, Audible alum, Jared Cook, because we talked to him on the show when he came out. I was actually going through my phone, Chris, and I was like, Jared Cook? Why do I have Jared Cook's phone number? Oh, yeah, I was on the show. So anyway, Audible alum, Jared Cook. Let's talk about the old man with his new team.
So Jared Cook, I mean, for as old as he is right now, right? I mean, I don't know about you, but I mean, quick question: do you think he's going to wind up in the Hall of Fame at some point? I mean, honest question.
Yeah, that's debatable, but let's say sure.
All right, I'm saying at the very least, Hall of Very Good. How about that? Yes. I mean, but for the teams that he's now been a part of, I mean, the significance of his role, like over the years. I mean, even when we had more or less from the fantasy perspective had left him for dead, like once he moved over to New Orleans, it was like, no, I mean, Drew Brees, I mean, they've got Michael Thomas, they've got all these other guys here. What's Jared Cook going to do? And he's come out and he's actually performed like year in and year out, despite like some of the injuries that he happened to have. He might have lost a step, but at the very least, again, it's about what offense is he attached to. The Chargers, I think they were 15th in EPA per play last season. I mean, red zone passing rate was about league average, but of course, it was because of the injuries that they had sustained like throughout the season. And Justin Herbert, I know we're not supposed to use terms like he was a baller, he balled out and all that, but he did. I mean, he absolutely did. I mean, you pointed it out earlier. I mean, the kid actually had zero intentions of starting. Tyrod gets his lung punctured, and then, history was made after that. And we wind up seeing the offensive rookie of the year born like right there, like on the field, like just at a moment's notice. But for Jared Cook, again, it's about the offense that he's attached to and the fact that now, I mean, I was actually more of a Donald Parham like truther than anything else. And that kind of like
an XFL film.
Oh, heck yeah, man. Like, so, man. But it's more, but now, like with Cook coming over, those dreams have been cratered, but we do see the potency of that offense. I mean, we now have a stable offensive line. I mean, multiple pass catchers, whether it's Keenan Allen. I mean, Keenan Allen in the intermediate areas of the field, Mike Williams deep. I mean, any of the other guys, Jalen Guyton as the ancillary receivers, and we haven't even talked about Austin Eckler out of the backfield. I mean, this offense now has multiple weapons that they can utilize. And once they get into the red zone, again, who is Justin Herbert going to be looking for? Keenan Allen and Mike Williams for sure, but you can always count on Jared Cook to be one of those guys to get those money touches in those high leverage situations, those high value situations. Right. So similar to Adam Trautman, I mean, can he wind up being that big bodied asset for Justin Herbert? Absolutely. And again, for the cost, I mean, for the ADP that is currently going now in underdog drafts, why not take the shot on a guy like that can wind up falling down with 5-6 touchdowns throughout the year at his cost? I can take a swing on that all day long.
1,000%, because who's Justin Herbert's favorite guy? It's the open guy.
Yeah.
And Jared Cook, I look at the defenses that the Chargers will regularly go up against. As I talk the Broncos every day right here on the fan, they can't cover tight ends. I know Alexander Johnson hates me on Twitter, but he'll be all right. He's fine. Him and Josie Jewell, they can't cover. The Raiders can't cover tight ends. The Chiefs struggle with covering tight ends. So I look at that situation. I go, Herbert's really smart. He's going to know how to attack these defenses within his own division, build that chemistry, red zone chemistry as well. That's what you're looking at. And from a fantasy perspective, oftentimes that's all we care about.
Mhm.
Hey, yeah. Your catches will be a little bit lower, but what's your touchdown ratio?
Right.
It could be pretty high with Jared Cook.
Absolutely. And I think for most of us that are wind up putting together the portfolios, again, going back to Underdog right now, Best Ball Mania 2, like going on in the streets and whatnot, that's what we're looking for. Are we looking for, after we draft the, Travis Kelce's of the world, the Darren Wallers of the world, TJ Hawkinson's and all that? I mean, constructing our rosters, we're looking for one of those tight ends that we can find in the background of the back end of our drafts that can wind up, complementing some of those guys we've drafted earlier. And Jared Cook, like, while he might not be a main target for most, he can wind up being one of those deep targets that if you wind up waiting on the position, he can wind up gobbling up enough of those touchdowns that can wind up boosting your roster like into a winning position for sure.
Right. And I know there's plenty of Kyle Pitts love out there for good reason.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, JC Horn told me, like, that dude's not a tight end. He's a big wide receiver. Yeah. So, we'll see, and excited about Arthur Smith down there and bringing up Pitts because it's basically 3 tight ends. You're looking at 3 tight ends. I want 3 tight ends. One of those guys are gone. Pitts is going so high that he has to hit on everything. Like, there's not a lot of value there. Cook is going so late. You can grab him as a deep sleeper. Now, Chris, is where I sound like even a bigger jerk than some people think I already am. And I go, deep sleeper? Like, we're going to get to deep sleeper, in fact, with our next guy, but it's not him. It's the guy 2 players behind him on the depth chart. So before we jump into that, Chris, just help me define sleeper because, I take a bunch of phone calls, do a fantasy show here on the Fan, every week. And people, give me a sleeper. And yeah, sleeper to a lot of people isn't a sleeper to me. It's probably not a sleeper to you. All these players that we're talking about are players that have been on our radar for a long, long time, or situations that we've already been monitoring in best ball drafts or early drafts, what have you. But how do you define sleeper in your eyes?
So for me, a sleeper is a guy where I'm almost like putting on, or I'm going to emulate the great Sigmund Bloom, and I'm going to try and say, look, what's the narrative? Like, walk me down the narrative of how that player winds up becoming at least a significant part of your starting roster. So if you're talking about managed leagues, and he might not be like your starting tight end, but he might be that guy on your waiver wire. If you subscribe to the idea that you draft 2 tight ends or whatever, he's that guy that's sitting there on the end of your bench, and it's just you have to squint almost to see how he gets onto the field, how he gets into your active roster on Sundays or Sundays, Thursdays, or Mondays. And that's really what I think about a sleeper, because most of the other guys, I mean, the guys that are going like maybe like tight end 15, like the Austin Hoopers of the world, I mean, those guys aren't sleepers, man. Like Chris Herndon's or whatever, not sleepers for me. Like you really need to think about what's the storyline in order for him to get there. And like the guys we've already discussed, like while Adam Trautman might be considered a sleeper, because we still need to think about what's his value after really essentially laying a dud like in his rookie season. I mean, what's the story for him to move forward? And that's why we had that debate about him. I'm sure we'll wind up talking like Tyler Conklin. What's the story? What's the narrative in order for him to get there? Even what's the rookie out of that's in Miami now? Hunter Long. Right. I mean, it could be a sleeper because it's like, what's the story? What's the narrative that I need to think through in order for him to start playing over Mike Gesicki? Which actually, if you think about it, it might not be too much of a stretch, depending on how much you like value Mike Gesicki. But it's just that's where you have to think through. I mean, the possibilities of trying to, I guess, categorize the sleeper, at least in my eyes.
Yeah, and that's why I want to get these next 2 done from our article so I can get to the deep sleepers that I think of when I think of deep sleepers. Again, sleeper is different for everyone out there. But Mo Alie-Cox, you listen to this show, you've heard Bloom talk about Mo Alie-Cox enough, and we always go on about basketball guys, whether it was Eric Swoop back in the day. When the Broncos worked him out, the Broncos were the first team to work out Eric Swoop, and that alerted the rest of the league of like, oh, maybe there's something there with a guy that never played college football. Either way, didn't do anything. Mo Alie-Cox, though, basketball guys we always watch. But just today on our newswire at footballguys.com, I was writing about Kylan Granson, the SMU kid, transferred from Rice, nose for the end zone, 14 touchdowns on the last 2 seasons. Versatility like you wouldn't believe, movement all around the formation. I'm writing also today on our newswire about how Jack Doyle's probably going to be asked to block more with the retirement of left tackle Anthony Costanzo. So while I want us to talk, Chris, about Mo Alie-Cox, that's kind of a old conversation for me, just because I've been on talking about him forever and ever and ever as a deep sleeper. Okay, Mo Alie-Cox, fine. But if Jack Doyle's blocking more, and then Kylan Granson coming in, and a lot of people, I had about a 7th round grade on him, might have been late 6th, early 7th.
Yeah.
Either way, they pick him up, they like him. Frank Reich saying, quote, he's an explosive athlete. We knew he was a real smart guy, and he's picking up the offense real fast, close quote. That's one of those drum beats. Like I make fun of the Mike. Yes, we get it. Mike Williams is going to play the X.
Oh, yes.
This Granson story is one of these drum beats, and it's like, what? What was that? Oh, you almost miss it, but you shouldn't miss it. And it's definitely interesting from a dynasty perspective. But let's talk about this Mo Alie-Cox situation, and then everybody in Indy.
Well, let's think about that. I mean, as I was just mentioning beforehand, from a sleeper perspective, what's the narrative that would get a guy like Granson or even like Mo Alie-Cox like back into our like good graces from a fantasy perspective? Because I know a lot of folks were kind of thinking Mo Alie like might have a larger workload like last season. In some cases with Phillip Rivers, he wound up getting it, but for like, I mean, pockets of fantasy value, like here and there, didn't really come to fruition. But now we've got Carson Wentz. We don't know. I mean, he's kind of the wild card in that offense, to be quite honest, after he completely cratered last year back in Philadelphia. But let's look at the rest of the offense. We'll set Carson Wentz aside. T.Y. Hilton, I know he got paid. To come back to that team, but getting a little long in the tooth. Can we really project him to make it through a full 16? Well, actually take that back. 17-week season. Don't know. Paris Campbell, injury history. Can he really make it through a full season? Also don't know. Michael Pittman Jr., sophomore season, don't know what he's going to provide. So it's like already in the passing game, you have at least a few enigmas that you need to at least account for within that offense. And then we haven't gotten to the running backs. I mean, Jonathan Taylor now coming up in his 2nd year. Naheem Hines also decent. I mean, actually more of a wide receiver than a running back, but still, I mean, useful in the passing game as well. So it's like, there's already a path for any of those tight ends, whether it be Mo Alie-Cox, Kylan Granson, to actually be a part of that offense right out of the gate, because you just have these question marks that are at receiver outside of just like their position, not even at the tight end position, the wide receivers themselves. So at least for me, I can already see a path for either one of those guys. And then if an injury occurs, rocket ship, like to the moon, like for either of them. So yeah, I can definitely, that's where, again, from a process standpoint, I can kind of already talk myself into, taking a deep shot at either of those guys, or at the very least, they'd be one of those guys that could be on your speed dial for waiver wire type of transaction later on in the season.
Love that waiver wire speed dial. And it also comes down to how you think about Carson Wentz. It seems like every time that I will tweet something about the Colts, somebody brings up like, well, Carson Wentz sucks. Well, what do you feel about him? How do you feel like he could bounce back? And a guy that's already used to using multiple tight ends from what he did in Philadelphia.
I like at least the opportunity, right? That he now has the chance to reunite with Frank Reich. At least the pass catchers, like, should everybody stay healthy? That at least provides some options to him. And of course, the offensive line. Last season, I think outside of maybe like weeks 1 and 2 or something like that, they had at least 1 to 2 starters on the offensive line, like on the injury report. It was just a constant problem for the Eagles. So if you have a quarterback that already has, he makes one mistake, it just compounds goes on to the next mistake, and he completely craters. And that continued throughout the entire season. So if you amplify that, like by a weak offensive line, then of course you wind up with what happened to Carson Wentz in 2020. Now shift him over to the Colts, who have one of the best offensive lines, like in the league, in terms of pass blocking, run blocking, whatever the case may be. When they actually added to like their stable offensive linemen during free agency and through the draft as well. So it's like I can see a path to Carson Wentz at least stabilizing and not necessarily reverting back to what the tear he was on before the Eagles wound up making their Super Bowl run, but at least let's say adequate, let's say above replacement level for a quarterback. I don't really see him putting up the same type of numbers from an efficiency standpoint that he did in 2020, because it's just he's not going to be in the same situation. He's not going to be asked to pass to Jalen Reagor, whom by all accounts we thought was going to be a good prospect, but one was injured, two couldn't separate. I mean, also on top of that, I mean, Alshon Jeffrey, not a part of that offense. JJ Arcega-Whiteside, not a part of that offense. So really, I mean, he was asked to also play behind a bad offensive line and with poor receivers on the other end of those passes. So now he actually has a more controlled situation. So at least for me, I do think that there's a chance for him to redeem himself. But again, where he's going at in terms of drafts over an underdog, I mean, well worth the risk given what we can at least project in terms of like from a positive standpoint for him.
Final tight end, number 5 on our list before we get to my special deep sleepers besides Kylan Granson. We got to talk about Cole Kmet. I'm not worried that he's the next Adam Shaheen. Mr. Chipotle didn't do anything in the NFL. But let's talk about Kmet because I really enjoyed Justin Fields' game. I know a lot of people and the Dan Orlovsky thing, I've ripped on it on air multiple times. Just god-awful information because there was someone around the Ohio State program that was spreading a rumor that Fields was using his epilepsy as a way to get out of practice. Now, when you check in with his coaches, with his teammates, hell, the Broncos drafted like 4 Buckeyes, it seems like. Mm-hmm. But when you talk to people that have been around him, they tell you that, I mean, that's just the lies, basically. And I don't know what teams listened. It's a conversation I've had about the Broncos. Like, did they listen to that bad information that someone moronic like Dan Orlovsky just takes off and runs with? I can't believe you wouldn't vet that sort of information. And, oh, he's just so lazy and this and that. None of that was ever true. And then I look at Fields and people saying, well, holds on to the ball too long. He went through his reads more than any quarterback in this class, even Trevor Lawrence. He made multiple reads and went to multiple players more than any quarterback in his draft class. We know that my man Trey Lance makes 1 read and runs, Mm-hmm. We know that Zach Wilson had a problem with pressure. He did not look good with pressure. And Trevor Lawrence is really, really excellent. But I think Fields could be much better than some people are giving him credit for. Chicago, tremendous pick, fantastic, stupendous, if you will. And now, Dalton's in his way, whatever. Get out the way, Andy. Make Justin Fields the guy. And how does that impact what he does with the security blanket like Cole Kmet?
Well, I 100% agree with your take on Justin Fields. Of course, as I mentioned beforehand, I mean, I live in Ohio, so at least while I graduated from the University of Cincinnati, so I constantly tell folks that I'm a Bearcat, not a Buckeye. But at least on the national stage, I will root for my guys, right? J.K. Dobbins, Justin Fields. I mean, Dwayne Haskins. We'll talk with him, right? I mean, but still, I mean, Justin Fields, absolutely. I mean, as a prospect, I never understood the slander for Justin Fields. I mean, deep ball accuracy, being able to create out of structure. I mean, as a rusher, I mean, dude ran what, a 4.4 40? I mean, forget about it. I mean, in this day and age, for a quarterback to be able to be that accurate and that mobile, I mean, everybody's excited about Jalen Hurts in his second year. But I mean, we've got, the better version of Jalen Hurts, already on the Chicago Bears as of right now. I mean, we don't, without any of the passing, any of the concerns in the passing game. So now it's I think it's very similar in what the LA Rams are dealing with when they switched from Jared Goff to Matthew Stafford, where they now have they're going from Mitchell Trubisky and, of course, Andy Dalton, whom, even though I'm a Bengals fan, it's Andy Dalton, just move out of the way. I mean, if you had your time, move out of the way.
Right.
But Justin Fields now has the same ability that Matthew Stafford does, in LA, where he can now activate all the players on the field. I mean, where we were hopeful about Darnell Mooney, coming out of college. But with Mitch Trubisky, I mean, we're not expecting Mitch Trubisky to be able to hit any of those deep passes to Mooney. Absolutely not. But with Justin Fields, he can activate that guy. He now be useful from a fantasy perspective.
He'll see him.
Yes,
Trubisky wouldn't even see him.
He wouldn't even. Yeah, exactly. Which I never quite understood the Trubisky pick. 1 year out of North Carolina, forget about it. I never quite got that pick. Whatever. But back to Fields and Kmet, it's like that's the type of connection that you would want to see. I mean, Allen Robinson, of course, I mean, mainstay, I mean, the primary alpha target within that offense. But now if you also can be able to use like both like your tight end, your wide receiver too. I mean, heck, since they also added, they get Tariq Cohen back, they add Damian Williams as well. I mean, now we've got multiple pieces now that we can rely on instead of beforehand where it's just, okay, Chicago Bears, all right, I'm just going to draft Allen Robinson. We'll see, he gets enough targets. I'll be fine with that. The rest of the guys don't even want to deal with it. But now with Kmet, similar case to Adam Trautman. I mean, if we do get Justin Fields and we do get that like good passer that we know he can be, that's now an offense that we would now want to invest in. That's an offense that we now think depending on what you think about, the rest of that division, Detroit, already moving backwards. We don't know what's going to happen with Green Bay. It's entirely possible that over the next couple of seasons that Chicago might actually wind up moving up in the ranks, like in the NFC North. So It's at least for my money, like if you get Justin Fields, Cole Kmet, like both learning and like growing up in the league together, that can be actually a fairly powerful combination that we can see actually start to build like right here in year one for Justin Fields.
Wrapping up the Audible Live, I would be remiss if I don't mention some of my favorite, like, super deep sleepers. They're so sleepy, you might have to wake them up. We're talking deep. But in addition to the Mike Williams story, which I've now made a joke 3 times, it's no longer funny, Chris, Noah Gray is a player that, watching the news wire, you just see there Noah Gray. And part of it is McCole Hardman undone anything. Mm-hmm. But let's discuss here maybe more 2 tight end sets, more usage. It's just interesting to note, maybe not for this year, but for Dynasty, Kansas City obviously really loves him. We've heard multiple stories about Noah Gray. So I like to bring those type of guys into the conversation just to put a pin in it and keep your eye on it.
And I'm 100% with you there because I know a lot of folks, Adam and I, so if you get a chance, go and check out the Dynasty newsletter show with me and Adam Wilde. We're recording on Mondays, but that's the type of asset that you would kind of want on your Dynasty rosters. Regardless of what you think about Travis Kelce, whether you're holding him until he dies on your roster, if you want to trade him and get out from under him, whatever the case may be, Noah Gray should be the guy that you would want, because I found it interesting that they completely revamped their offensive line. Good for Patrick Mahomes, but at the same time, they haven't really added much from a wide receiver perspective. They jettisoned Sammy Watkins, so now he's out catching passes from Lamar Jackson, and it's just they're expecting Demarcus Robinson, Byron Pringle, and McCole Hardman in order to kind of complement an aging Travis Kelce and then Tyreek Hill, who ain't that much younger either. So I can totally see a situation where Andy Reid has to look at this offense and be like, we just cannot continue to rely on these 2 primary skill position players in order to power this offense. So moving to more 2 tight end sets, being not having to rely on running these 3x1 ISO plays that they've been doing for Kelce for time in memoriam, which Kelce
forever
continues to eat on. Absolutely. But it's just, if they want to transition into a different type of offense in order to continue to get them deep into the playoffs, then Noah Gray has to be a part of that equation at some point. Because after, what was it, the past, I think it was during the Super Bowl, one of the playoff games where Patrick Mahomes threw and hit McCole Hardman in the butt. What do we expect? What are we expecting out of Hardman moving forward? So I can definitely see Gray being one of those guys that's just again, the offense he's attached to. Can you see a situation where he winds up being on the field in year 1? Yes. And then of course, that's the quarterback he's attached to. It all kind of fits as a player that can wind up getting on the field. And of course, knock on wood that Travis Kelce, who hasn't missed a game in 4 years, 5 years since he's missed a game due to injury. If any of that were to happen, then of course it's Noah Gray. Value straight up to the moon, right after that as well.
How much of a Cincinnati fan are you? Because do you know why he missed a year in college? Oh, we can't say that on air. We'll save that for after the show. He's Chris Allen. I'm Cecil Lammey. Real quick, just because I promised I would bring it up. The Tyler Kroft thing, watch that. Because Chris Herndon's like Ian Thomas. He's one of those guys you're interesting, you don't do anything. Mm-hmm. I'm going to look at Dan Arnold. I'm going to look at Tyler Kroft now, getting some love. I believe it was from The Athletic there as well. And then Wyoming Cowboys, baby. Jacob Hollister, a college teammate of Josh Josh Allen, excuse me. I choke up just when I talk about him because the Broncos didn't take him. There were more people from the fan at Josh Allen's pro day where I was in Laramie than were from the Broncos. Broncos sent 2 people.
Yeah.
Disgrace. Absolute disgrace. So now Jacob Hollister there because Dawson Knox is dangerously close to being one of those Ian Thomas, Chris Herndon guys where like, dude, I know Dawson Knox can play. You know, I know he can play. That's not even an issue. But, dude, you have to produce. Now is the time. And if you don't, Hollister's already got that connection and has flashed. I know he couldn't get over the end zone line with Seattle, but Hollister has flashed a little bit. So briefly, Chris, as we tie a bow on tonight's show, let's talk about these situations.
Yeah, I think that the Buffalo Bills situation, that's definitely an offense that you want to continue to stack as many players as you possibly can from. I mean, I don't care if I know a lot of folks will want to bring up the dreaded like regression term when it comes to Josh Allen, but regardless, I mean, you can't knock the leap that he made like between his second and third season, like with the addition of Stephon Diggs. I mean, they completely reworked that offense in order to kind of suit the fact that Josh Allen, I mean, he had a big arm like coming out of college. We get that. But now if you can control it, actually get him a receiver that knows how to separate, like one of the best receivers in the league. I mean, you talk to Matt Harmon, I mean, about wide receiver, Stephon Diggs is one of the first names that comes out of his mouth. Absolutely. I mean, whether it's Devontae Adams, Stephon Diggs, I mean, it's just, that is one of the guys that, I mean, that we know to be one of the top receivers in the league. And that helps Josh Allen. I mean, top 5 in terms of EPA per play, neutral passing rate, like completely up. I mean, in the offensive yards per drive, I mean, from an offensive standpoint, I mean, they were all producing. I mean, maybe not so much for Zach Moss and Devin Singletary, but the passing game, absolutely.
Right.
So now, I mean, after Jacob Hollister, I mean, he comes over from Seattle. Seattle, we knew they have, I mean, they brought in Gerald Everett, of course, but they've been using tight ends like quite a bit over the past few seasons. So it's like, all right, so Seattle actually likes to use their tight ends. They let him walk. So it's like they know that at least that he's talented. It's not the fact that he couldn't cut it in Seattle.
Should have used him, by the
Absolutely.
way. I talked to Hollister at one of the Super Bowls. I think it was the Ram. I think it was 53. It was the one in Atlanta. I remember talking to Jacob and his brother just at media night. And the Patriot, I always thought New England will get it right. And they'll figure out what they have with Jacob Hollister. They haven't. Now maybe Buffalo does.
I think that they can. And I would say that at least from an athletic profile standpoint, I would rather Hollister over Knox anyway. And if they wind up just completely putting the pedal to the metal on the passing game, I mean, they brought in they brought in Emmanuel Sanders. I mean, we'll see what Gabriel Davis can do. I mean, if they wind up putting Hollister over Dawson Knox, then of course that now really completes that entire offense, as now we've got 4 complete weapons that are on the field for Josh Allen to throw to, and they can again push to wind up being the top team in the AFC.
We could talk all night. Chris, certainly appreciate you. Love having you on board with footballguys.com, and everyone, you're watching the Audible, you're listening to the Audible, you're going to see a lot more and hear a lot more from Chris in the coming months as well. So make sure, everyone, to do all those YouTube things, like, comment, share, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so that you never miss a vid. It is the Audible, and it is brought to you by footballguys.com. He's Chris Allen. I'm Cecil Lammey. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening, everybody. Stay tuned. And as always, stay frosty.